Okay, second time's the charm. Got it working on the second try. Hello, for those of you tuning in, I'm James Craik, an independently published author, and today I'm showing my fantasy book because I'm here continuing my loose series of craft talks with other creatives. And we're going to be talking about fantasy and problems that happen in the fantasy genre for no good reason, in my opinion, except possibly that the creator is stupid. But I want to be charitable, and that's why I brought on other people to convince me that there's other explanations. But if you want to buy my little adventure romance isekai thing, that I gotta get a elevator pitch for that better. That link is in the description. But I brought on T. Alex Ratcliffe, a book reviewer whose stream I've been on in the past, and I brought on Thrifty Gaming because I reached out on Twitter with this idea and got some good responses here.
Yeah.
What's
so
up,
that's
everybody?
That's the name of my YouTube channel. My author name is Ian Knoll, IAN.
Okay, dude, you're confusing. You come on here, you give me a YouTube channel named Thrifty Gaming. You're named Thrifty Gaming.
Okay.
You're shadow banned on X. Come on.
Hey, that was some kind of auto flag thing because they said I was boosting or something, and I was not. So I did not.
Okay. So just to explain what really got under my skin is going to sound autistic, and that's okay. This is my channel. I was watching seasonal anime to see what was good and what's been coming out, and I watched the strongest magician in the Demon Lord's army was a human. And this was not the first time I've seen this problem. Good evening, John. Thanks for tuning in. It opens with the Demon Lord conquers the city because they're in war with the humans, yada, yada, yada. They're expanding. The main character is leading this double life. That's all fine stuff. But the wizard blows holes in the wall so they can get in. Makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Except he put a hole through the bottom of the wall. Like a clean tunnel through the wall. Do either of you see the problem with that?
Structural integrity is one.
Correct. It is a wonderful idea to put a hole through the bottom of a wall. That's how you tumble them down. That is like the primary way of capturing a fortress. Because it collapses. I have no understanding of how a creator screws that up other than they just don't know how things work.
Now, is this story presenting itself as like a serious fantasy story, or is it just kind of like joking?
It is not a comedy. I'll say that.
It's not a comedy. Okay.
You can get away with way more as a comedy.
So I actually, later in the stream, I'm going to bring up Konosuba as almost like the anti-point here, because Konosuba is a nonstop comedy, and I love it. But it actually makes significantly more sense than like many serious shows do, actually, because it actually explores the consequences of its own decisions, like when cabbages are violent animals that want to bludgeon you to death and you have to kill them in order to eat them. They actually explore the consequences of that and you make it kind of make sense. Like, you know that in Konosuba it was done for comedy, not because the creator doesn't understand how these things work. Another great example I keep encountering, which you may have noticed in the thumbnail, which, okay, that's Axel from Konosuba. But I swear 9 out of 10 times there will be a fantasy city that's like a walled off city because there's monsters out there, don't you know? And there's no farms. This happens in Hollywood movies too. Like, this was in, I think, Vikings or something like that. Where they had a castle and they were sieging, and there was like no town, there was no villages, there were no roads to it. It was just like this fortress on a cliff in the middle of nowhere that they had to capture.
This is probably a result of people living in cities and not knowing where their food comes from, like having no connection to the earth whatsoever.
Yep. It's really the same reason that, bad war tactics or bad sword fighting form or stuff happens in shows.
War tactics are the worst.
Don't have a clue.
The other show that really bugged the hell out of me, because like in a lot of ways I liked the show, was last season the New Gate came out, which is like yet another take on, all these people playing this VR MMO got stuck in the game. If you die in real life. The main character has to fight, beats the final boss, everyone gets freed except him. He gets portaled into the world to live there as his reward.
Oh, what a reward.
there's plenty of fine character moments, and realistically, you like it because it's got some catharsis, and you like his companions. All of that's fine, and it made the show watchable. But every single time monsters showed up, it's just this giant mob of mindless enemies that just walk forward into explosions.
Well,
What is the nature of the enemies, though? Would it make sense for them to be a mindless mob? Like, are they
So
zombies?
in the Newgate, the Newgate is in this really weird position where it's trying to leave it as a mystery of whether it's still a game or if it's a real world, because it still uses game mechanics, but like he has flesh and blood now, kind of deal. And the monsters are supposed to be like a real version of MMO monsters. And it's just kind of portraying that, yeah, MMO monsters just swarm into your AoE attacks.
I was gonna say, couldn't you just argue that they're hyper aggressive and not smart, and that's why they do that? I mean, if they're not human, if it's a human or humanoid thing, I could see the problem. But you could.
I mean, I think in the big climax, it was, if I recall correctly, it was skeletons.
So do they
skeletons kind of
minds?
makes sense.
Do they even have minds? Like, or are they just like puppets or automatons? Maybe they.
All right, so you've immediately hit on the problem with this conversation, which is most things that get brought up that are stupid in fantasy are explained as, well, it's magic. I ain't got to explain that. It's magic. Which unfortunately is a very potent defense a lot of the time.
Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Like the whole the wheelchair argument.
The D&D combat wheelchair.
Adventurers. That's one where it doesn't hold water because we know how physics work and we know how wheelchairs work in real life. Like magic is magic, but other than the magic in a fantasy setting, we generally assume it works like normal. So it's only when we're talking about these fantastical parts that we can say, okay, we don't really know. And that's the case with skeletons. Skeletons don't walk around in the real world, so we can't say, oh, they would use smart tactics.
Now, okay, I am going to make an argument just on how the wheelchair case can work, because the wheelchair case is not like, oh, we've got crippled people. It's like, no, in a fantasy setting where you can heal a basic injury, that's one thing. Weird. But if you have someone, say, who has like some burdensome magic or some blessing that like screws up their body so they can't walk properly, that can actually be a good storytelling tool. This person bears such a heavy burden, they can't use the rest of their body, so they have to be pushed around.
There have been famous characters like that. Ravenor in the 40K books, Inquisitor, Professor X is probably the most famous. But the thing is, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about like the melee combat non-magic wheelchair users.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so hear me out on an adjacent point about that. Yeah. Because I had a similar argument, not even argument, just a disagreement. I just got out of the DM. I put my foot down. And no one else wanted to DM, so I had the final say. My players were talking about non-human races and monstrous races because it's like, hey, what if we did a monstrous race campaign? Someone asked to be a centaur. I was just like, no, because a centaur can't climb a ladder. And that means Dungeons and Dragons, a dungeon diving game, which you have to remember, Dungeons and Dragons is a dungeon diving game. It is not a narrative game. There's like 1,000 other game systems you could be playing if you wanted a narrative game where your ability to crack skulls is not as important. You need basically every character to have more or less the same mobility. It's more stark when someone brought up, can I play a harpy? Oh, so you can just fly over every single trap. Okay, it's just a waste of time for me to put traps in the dungeon at that point, which I think traps in a dungeon are a waste of time. But for a dungeon diving game, everyone has to be able to more or less get through the same obstacles. So you can't have a centaur, and by the same logic, you can't put someone in a wheelchair because they can't go up steps.
True.
Now, story,
dungeons have to be handicapped accessible. This is, was an ordinance that was passed. All the liches had to remodel. Okay.
Yep. The Society of Wizards passed regulations last year about this when they banned the Greater Baja Blast.
Yes.
Now, I will say one of the funniest moments, I used to listen to a lot of people role-playing because I work all the time. And one of the funniest moments that came up is when one of the characters was crippled, like his actual spine was blown out. So the other characters just shoved him in a barrel. And he spent about 6 sessions in that barrel because they could never find a healer. So they're just dragging him along in the dungeon in this barrel.
Sometimes
this would be an issue if there wasn't an expectation of every player character being about as useful as every other player character.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
like that's really what the wheelchair argument hinges on, is that everyone at the table is there to have fun, which means that you don't want to have one person not doing anything.
Yeah, and
which, by the way, is why a level 1 wizard is bad design, because they get their sleep spell and then they do nothing.
That does lead to some of the better elements of role playing, I think, though, is dealing with your weaknesses.
I actually think
but D&D's not that system.
I mean, level 1 wizard or whatever, especially in the older editions where they're kind of weaker to start out, you could, if you design things right, you could make up for that, because wizards have a lot of knowledge, right? So you could have like a dungeon where there's a lot of, scrolls and books and things that are in languages other people don't know, or, various things that they can use their knowledge for instead of their spells, if they're limited in spells so far, until they get more powerful. And that's a way for them to be more involved. I mean, yeah.
Sure. So if I were to get back into DMing, I'd probably have a policy that the more you know the system, the higher you must have your intelligence score. Because that just fixes the metagaming issue. Because like 90% of what a knowledge roll is used for, a seasoned player already knows that information.
True. I thought the cantrips were originally introduced to help the level 1 wizard.
Yeah, that too. But I mean, if you're playing an older version without those, or
right, that gets into how 5e works, which it was trying to take the good aspects of 4e and bring it back to the more popular 3e version of the game. Cantrips make sense, but far from the worst problem with 5e.
I think we're getting a little sidetracked.
Yeah,
we definitely are. So I'm going to bring up, this happens in this half-baked thinking happens in books too. I brought this up as one of my complaints when I reviewed Perdido Street Station by China Maville, which I still have very conflicted feelings about, because it remains one of the better books I read that year, but it still has such massive oddities in the book. And one of the plot points is like the dock workers are on strike, and this is to explore the borderline fascistic military state that rules the city, and how they crack down on it, and how the adventuring party is dealing with that. It all makes sense, except for the fact that the way the dock workers go on strike is they freeze the water solid in the canal, and they keep it frozen with like Moses parting the Red Seas for 8 hours. And I tried to do some very reasonable math on how much water should have flowed through that gap. And I got like 7 big houses, basically. Big House, the U of M stadium, I'm a Michigander, sue me, worth of water somehow just didn't flow and didn't flood the city. The author just clearly thought that a canal was stagnant water.
Yep.
It doesn't work like that.
So it's just a canal. It's not an actual dock. Like, it's not facing out to the ocean.
Really not explained well. Boats do come in and out. There are rivers going through the city. Sure, you can carve out an area and have relatively still water, but I did my math assuming the flow rate of the Everglades, if I remember correct, which is not fast.
No. Well, I mean, freezing something like that, whether canal, like if it's a canal, it's even worse, because that's going to cause tremendous damage. Water expanding when it freezes.
They didn't freeze it. They turned it to magic gel. So, which unfortunately brings me back to, it's magic. I ain't got to explain anything.
So I'm assuming all the fish are dead.
Yeah, it seems like that was.
I think that was like a joke about the fish flying through it and dropping dead when they hit the air. That was used as like a gag, if I remember right.
I'm sure all the fishermen who rely on that for their livelihood, and all the people who rely on the fish to live, they're not laughing. They're like, warm food. What are you doing? We're dying.
Well, to be fair, what's his name? The city in Perdido Street Station is so polluted that if you touch the water, you get a disease, basically.
Oh, so we're talking an Ankh-Morpork situation.
Even worse. Because Perdido Street Station is not meant to be a comedy.
I feel that all stories, to some degree, should have a small element of comedy in them. Just a little bit. Yeah, because you don't want to take it too seriously.
Writing banter.
Oh, yeah.
I'm writing a dark fantasy story now for our next do an anthology collection. Pretty dang dark, but there's some very dry humor in it. There's one part where they're talking and one of the guys, because they're going to hunt a witch who has done some very bad things to their village, and one of the guys says, so whether we all survive and succeed depends on if this witch was very focused and paranoid or not. And then the lady who's with him says, yes, basically. Yes, we are. That's it.
Okay, so I just want to throw this in to prove that I'm not just a hater. I highly recommend everyone try the Overly Cautious Hero, which literally the entire gimmick of that show is the hero assumes the absolute worst case scenario of basically, what if the demon lord spawns in the starting village to kill me when I'm just starting? And he prepares accordingly. And it is a 10 out of 10, I think 13 episode series, and it's done. It wraps up. It was beautiful. It took its premise to every logical conclusion and still had every possible payoff. Oh, perfect story. And it's also hilarious more often than not.
I do love, and this is an anime, I take it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the Japanese have really taken this concept and just gone every which direction you can possibly go with it.
They love playing with plot elements.
Granted, it's come out with. So I want to bring up one anime that's really annoyed me lately, and that's Re-Monster, because that. Are either of you familiar with the story?
All right, want me to give my quick read on Re-Monster?
Go for it.
It was a fantastic monster progression isekai that after about one season, not even after half a season of content, stopped the progression because he became the most powerful in the world. And then it just turned into, I don't know what to do with this story anymore. Let me just give him a harem of monster girls. Pretty much. And it's not just that, he follows the Goblin Slayer rules that goblins basically can breed with anything and produce more goblins, which he proceeds to do. At first it's like, oh, I saved these girls and okay, I'm going to do them and that's fine. Then he captures the elves. Drug them too. Yep. And then he captures the elves, kills all the males and keeps all the females, and then basically just has his way with them. And then he just proceeds to go and destroy every army on Earth because he's just that powerful and steal all the women. And also all of his kids are overpowered. Yeah.
It sounds like the kind of series they keep behind the counter.
It should be. It's not as gratuitous as you'd think. It's really just some guy's psychological fat material. Like, oh, this is how strong I want to be and have all the women and blah, 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 blah.
You want to talk about inserting, for no good reason, inserting the author's fat material? It's like Overlord.
Oh, you're gonna make me sad because I actually kind of like Overlord. I get what you mean, but I kind of like Overlord.
All right, so before getting into randomly inserting the side characters having their way with characters because it appeased the author, presumably, Overlord did such a good volume 1. And then he just did not know what to do with the story after he got over the kind of, oh, I miss playing with my friends kind of sadness. As soon as that phase of the story ended, terrible.
I think to a lesser degree, maybe Rising of Shield Hero is kind of similar. They had
that one went off the rails.
They had, yeah. The driving thing was him being socially ostracized, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And what was her name? She had 2 different names. The princess.
I don't remember her name.
But
She got renamed to like bitch face or something.
Yes.
yeah. But
By her
she was
mother.
even though she wasn't like the lead villain, like the main person who's fighting, she was basically the driving antagonist. And once they got rid of her, once she was stripped of power and everything and lost it, the series kind of just lost its direction. And at that point, I just stopped watching because it just became very generic.
Yes.
Yeah, after that, they had to introduce the other world and invasion heroes that go in to win the battle for like which it got weird after that.
Yeah, well, I saw a little bit of that, but it was just like this feels like it just could be like any isekai. It just felt very generic, and I was like, I can watch a bunch of other shows that are. I mean, it's not like offending me, but that are basically like this, so I don't really want to waste my time with it.
Oh, it would have been far more entertaining if they'd have kept him being ostracized and then introduced the other world coming in. Like have an uneasy alliance thing, like, well, we don't like you, but we have to have you. And like
Well, what
the
they
kind of
could have
concessions.
done is if they had left him ostracized and brought in the other world sooner, there would have been a temptation for him to side with the other heroes.
Yep.
That's a fair point. Although I forget, does everyone die in that world, including what's her name, Raphtalia? If the other world heroes win, I don't know.
I think
I don't
this
remember
world,
'cause I gave up on Rising the Shield Hero like 4 years ago. I decided it was trash.
Well, once you watch through that arc where the princess gets her comeuppance, which speaking of stupid things, that's not like a world thing necessarily, but they are way too lenient on her.
oh yeah.
Considering that like later in a later episode when she comes back, when she's been, dealt with, quote unquote, she tries to poison the girl, Raphtalia, by putting poison in a pie, and it's just treated as a gag and then not cared about. It's like, okay, so she literally tried to kill someone in your part, like you just okay, like you're just gonna have her walking around as a servant, and that's fine. And speaking of stupid things, but that's more of like a plot stupidity than a world
Actually,
stupidity. It's like,
you know what? I think that at one point his intention, the guy who was writing the story, was to have the shield hero go to the Beast Kingdom and then use them to, because remember in the story initially he was a hero to like the demi-humans, like everybody but the humans loved the shield hero.
yeah,
That would have been a much better story.
Yeah,
had it
that
been,
went nowhere.
there was this whole ethnic conflict, that it was kind of set up, and then everything just wrapped up way too neatly for that. And that's the direction it probably should have gone in. When he starts getting like, if you don't want to keep him with the bad reputation the whole time, because I mean that eventually that does have to get resolved, that could have been the direction they go with it. And he kind of patches things up, but then there's this ethnic conflict, and he's kind of naturally on that side, and then
well, naturally you gravitate to the people that like you.
Well, I mean, but he does have, he did have some friends on the other side by the end of all that stuff, because the younger princess and the queen, they were nice to him. So it's kind of like you could have it be, you would want to do it where it's morally gray, who's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have an interesting conflict there. After, if you want to continue something after he resolves his ostracism problem, that's the direction I think it should have gone in.
There are very few anime that do morally gray very well.
This is pretty true. Oftentimes when they do morally gray, it's not actually, one side is actually just a dick. When they expect you to sympathize with.
I mean, that's just like always true of people talking about their gray morality, because that's just a subterfuge to mean everyone's terrible.
Well, you can do gray morality where people are simply acting on what's best for them rather than, everybody being morally dubious. Like you can have them have morals, but you don't have to have them all be just monsters.
Yeah, it's led to a lot of backlash online of people being upset with gray morality. And they're saying gray morality because they're complaining about stories where just everyone's terrible. Say Game of Thrones, which was another example of how would anyone survive 6-year-long winters? It's just not possible.
I actually have a video in the works on that because I've been doing the research, and I left it up to my channel to decide what video I made this week. And this week is going to be ruining the supernatural, but I still have that other video on the back burner because it's more plausible than you might think. Not as
Interesting.
plausible.
If you look at,
We can come back to that.
it depends
But
on what,
people
like,
are. Sorry, go ahead.
it depends on what, like what on how intense we're talking, like a 6-month winter, because you got to consider places like Alaska, places way up north where it's really cold. I mean, there are places where people live and exist, and it's maybe not the most heavily populated,
But this
I mean,
isn't a
if you can go
6-month
out
winter.
and hunt big animals, you can pull it off. You can't do that when you're beset by armies of White Walkers, though.
Mhm. You've also got one of the things that makes it possible in that world is just how sparsely populated that world is. Like you notice in the story, like they're all, even during the summer, they're always eating salt beef, salt pork. All the food is preserved just no matter what they eat. And that's kind of a side effect because they're always talking about laying in this, laying in that. Things like you can get food like salt pork or pemmican to last several years. You can pickle vegetables that will last several years. The food aspect's actually not the hardest part of this. The hardest part of this is is accounting for the temperature difference. Because is it like a winter like ours? Because the longer it goes on, is it going to get deeper and colder? You need a certain, and then trees require a certain amount of sunlight to continue living over the year.
that's the thing about, the problem with you've got like an eternal winter. It's like, okay, there are winners and there are winners, here in the real world. Like I said, you basically argue that Alaska is pretty much winter all year long. But there's still warmer periods.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So, like, if Westeros had the climate of Florida, they could be in winter for 100 years and not care.
Kinda. So you can even have like the really cold climates and like everything come back because there are plants, and I can speak from this as a gardener, that will live in the soil for several years before sprouting back up. It's not that far fetched. Like, just try to get rid of crabgrass. It takes about 2 years to kill it. Like, you can literally cover the yard in black plastic. It'll come back.
I figured it out. They're all eating kudzu.
Yes, kudzu. Wonderful kudzu. Yummy. Delicious.
I hear it's actually not even bad.
I mean, it's a mixture of ivy and bamboo, and you can eat bamboo.
Edible.
Well, with few exception, most leaf vegetables kind of all taste the same.
Except for kale, which tastes like bug spray.
Yeah, kale is terrible. Spinach, I think, is notably good, but like everything else tastes the same.
So I'm growing I guess you'd call oregano an herb, but I'm growing lettuce and oregano, and both of them basically grow like weeds. So I'm sure there's a reason to tell them apart, but I honestly can't. Aside from like what they look like and what they taste like.
I was gonna say, I think the flavor is pretty significant.
I mean, in general, like how they grow and how prolific they are and how hard they are to kill, they're kind of not that different.
Okay, so
we were talking about
here's the critical question: do any of us here think George R.R. Martin researched winter preservation foods, particularly when Westeros didn't know they were going into an extended winter?
I think he did bare bones, like, okay, salt meat and pickled vegetables, and okay, we're good to go. Like, oh, we're going to use hard root vegetables. Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah, Google. Well, he did this before Google, but I guess looked up at his local library, good foods for winter or something.
That's a good point. We are extremely advantaged right now because we have the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God for it too.
Yeah, we are surrounded by so much information, particularly on YouTube, of historical research, gardening tips, analysis, random people that want to put up prepper videos about how to do all these things. And that definitely didn't exist in the 90s.
So it actually, just as a proper testimonial, the internet did save my life when I was writing Hapless Homesteader, because I had to find out what it actually took to survive, but not just how to survive, but where to look for it. Like, where's he going to find this information? Like, if it weren't for the internet, that would have taken so freaking long. Like, I've got the books now to like read on the more specifics because I got interested in it. but I'd have had to read like 12 or 13 books just to make the one small book that I made.
You know, that a lot of people will talk about how expensive publishing a book is, and they'll quote editing and marketing and the cover art. No one ever talks about how much you kind of need to spend buying research books.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I
nowadays,
have, like, my next book I'm going to write might actually cost me more in books I bought to research than the cover art is going to cost.
Dang, dude.
Well, I just bought a bunch of U.S. Army field manuals,
Ah,
yeah.
and those are short, and the price adds up quickly.
are you doing military sci-fi?
Technically, I already have. Ship of Fools is labeled military sci-fi, but this is going to explicitly be a shoot 'em up.
I think one of my first years of reviewing books was about half military sci-fi, and I got a little burnt out on the genre.
Is it derivative after you read like a good chunk? I feel like it gets derivative.
It has a little bit. I think the worst one I read was crap, I can't remember the name of it. It was a zombie military survival thing.
World War Z?
No, it's kind of like World War. It's like, I think it's called like A Place in the Wild or something. So, and one of the reasons I will always have a negative opinion of this book because it does that cliche ending where they couldn't think of a name for the town, and at the end of the book they named it Hope.
I can't even insult that because my cyberpunk city, which is post-apocalyptic, they call it Bastion because it's a walled city that protects them from the apocalypse.
I mean, that's bad, but it's not as bad.
Hey, I'm not good at naming things.
They're both kind of like the first thing you would think of to name something like that in that situation.
In my defense, it was named by a basically corrupt communist government that was propagandizing people.
I'm surprised they didn't name it the Grand and Glorious Bastion.
I'll think about that. I do need to write books set during the founding.
The People's Bastion.
No, the People's
There
Bastion.
you go. The People's Bastion of glorious unity and harmony and fun.
Yeah, that's actually why I haven't written books about the founding, is I don't want to read the Gulag Archipelago.
Oh. So I've kind of opened the floodgates, and now I have to read The Count of Monte Cristo again. And because eventually I'm going to have... I mentioned in one of my videos about how it's a good example of revenge, but I don't want to read that doorstop.
Yeah, it's so long, and so much of it could be cut out. The entire Rome saga is unnecessary.
I thought to myself, maybe I'll just buy the audiobook just to remind myself. And I look at it, it's like
a 45-hour audiobook.
It's 52 hours. Or it's like 50 hours. It's a monster.
So I guess grabbing the youth abridged version or just watching the movie is not an option, huh?
No, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right.
The opening act of Count of Monte Cristo up until his escape, I still say it's some of the best writing I've ever read, and yet I've never finished it because after that it's such a slog.
If there was ever a book that was a slog, it's that one. Like I've said, that thing could kill an Australian spider with a 1-inch drop. That thing is a monster. It is literally the biggest book I've ever attempted to read, except for maybe there's another one that another reviewer I talked to has reviewed. It's named after something in the brain. I can't remember what it is. It was done by, I think, a YouTuber, and it's a big old book. It's like 1,000 pages. What's it called?
Brandon Sanderson wannabe?
No, it's a weird book, and I have a penchant for weirdness. You catch my attention with weird. Actually, I'll look it up. Hang on a second. I got it on my wish list.
Okay, so while Alex is looking that up, my theory on how these half-baked things happen in fantasy stories is it is a consequence of we kind of touch on this. It's a consequence of writers who are more educated by other fiction stories than by reality. I personally think that the most important thing a fantasy writer can read is history. And that is apparently not shared by most fantasy authors.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty self-evident. And you do definitely, I know you said you want to talk a bit about anime, but you do definitely see that a lot with modern anime, even more so than the older stuff. Anime is interesting because the the kind of copying of Western fantasy was something that came over there where they didn't have the history. They're not, European history is not Japanese history, and they kind of went straight to the fantasy. They're like, ooh, we like this, and then they brought that over kind of wholesale. So it's I guess even more concentrated, kind of that effect of where the fantasy is very self-referential to the genre.
Yeah, everything in Japan seems to have a genealogy tracing back to Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that really made it big there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found the book. I posted it in private chat. You could look it up. It's called Amygdala, or Amygdala, whichever you want to call it. And it's just, it looks so weird. And I'm like, okay, if for nothing else than the value of reviewing something weird, it would almost be worth it.
Jesus Christ. Why? What is going on with this price?
Yeah. It's a pickle. It's $64.99 for the hardcover.
Oh, why'd you give it away? I was going to ask chat. I was going to ask chat for guesses of how expensive this random YouTuber's book is.
Page count, 1,006 pages. No, even for 1,006 pages, that seems a little steep. Unless it's like a giant
print on demand, 1,006 pages is, I believe, about $12 of paper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe more. It might be closer to like $15 of paper. This dude for a paperback wants $58.99.
Oh.
Dude, but it's got 303 ratings and it's at 4.8, and it makes me curious. Like that same curiosity I had for Malazan.
I still got to read Malazan.
Who the heck is Sam Fenna? You said this is a YouTuber?
I think it's a YouTuber. I'm not sure.
Never heard of him.
There's some controversy around the book I'm not 100% familiar with.
Okay.
Like it might just be YouTube famous. It certainly looks like an
YouTube famous.
Book.
I want 303 reviews. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And it really makes me, that's a lot of reviews to have for this ridiculously long book.
Ridiculously expensive.
Dynamite's a good point. That book costs as much as filling up your car with gas.
That's a sad statement to make, because there was a time when they were matched, but it wasn't that bad. Like I remember filling up my car for $10.
Oh my God. I'm about to be road tripping a 4.5-hour trip one way. I'm at least going to be splitting the gas 3 ways, but I am not looking forward to spending probably $100, probably $150 in gas.
I feel for you. I got to go to Kansas at the end of next month. I'm going to live stream a convention.
I just scrolled down.
What convention is that? I got it saved over here. You're asking a lot of questions I should know answers to.
I just scrolled down to the similar items that may ship from close to you, and I can tell that after pulling this up, I'm going to have some weird furry stuff recommended on my Amazon. So thanks for that.
Okay, riddle me this: frequently bought together amygdala and baking yesteryear the best recipes from the 1900s to the 1980s.
There's a lot of baking in amygdala.
What? Products related to this item: the Book of Bill from Gravity Falls. This is the weirdest thing I've ever encountered on Amazon, I think. Also, War and Peace Deluxe Hardbound Edition.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so the
expensive one?
convention I'm going to is the ICT Comic Con and Science Fiction Expo in Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
It's going to be a bit of a trip, but I wanted to do one closer to home, but they don't have any authors there. Or at least their
I
website
put
doesn't.
some
have one.
thought into whether or not I should be spending a bunch of money and losing weekends going to conventions like that as an author so I can sell maybe 20 books.
I mean, if nothing else, it could be fun.
I like going to conventions as a guest.
I have done neither.
Or
So.
like as a regular person, not trapped behind a booth.
Well, yeah, if you're at the booth, you're working there. Of course, it's not as fun.
I can't tell if Porcelain Chips here is taking the piss. I honestly don't know.
I'm not familiar with the book.
Yesteryear is an effing treasure, YouTube Shorts, and he deserves to be recommended next to everything.
Is that the guy who wrote the book? Like, is that his YouTube channel?
Well, Baking Yesteryear. So okay,
No, it's a different author.
Okay, so Baking Yesteryear is that book, but it's by this guy, I guess, who runs a baking channel. So
Oh,
so
it is two different books.
maybe they're frequently bought together because they're both YouTuber books. And
I would buy Baking Yesteryear. I mean, I like to cook.
All right, I need to get a cork board and some string and start working this out.
Okay, well, Sam Fenna does have a YouTube channel, and it looks like the YouTube channel is featuring stuff related to this book, like weird animations and stuff.
Gotcha.
So
that makes more sense.
Hey, there's one with the Nostalgia Critic with Fenna. This Amygdala character.
How many subscribers does he have? By the way, viewers, you should subscribe. I want to get monetized.
It's nice.
He has 304,000 subscribers. 304,000. So a third of a million. So pretty big channel, actually.
That's the baking guy?
No, this is the Sam Fenna of Amygdala. The baking guy has 2.21 million. That's B. Dylan Hollis. If you just type in baking yesteryear. So the baking guy has 2.21 million. Sam Fenna has about a third of a million.
I did my author career entirely wrong. Clearly, I was supposed to become a famous YouTuber first.
No, well, speaking of famous YouTubers who also wrote books, what do you guys think of Razor Fist's first two books?
I have not read the second. I've heard it's significantly better than the first.
I haven't read either, so
the second one is definitely the superior of the two. It's about a 3 out of 5, I'd say. Like, it's got a much
I wish somebody had told me it was unrelated to the first.
It's related, but it's not like you don't need to read the first to understand what's going on in the second.
So basically, I should just skip the first and pick up the second.
The first is not worth your time.
I have never had a 100-page book that took so long to get through. Like it's outrageous. I kept falling asleep, and that's not an insult to Razor Fist. He just writes like he talks, which is, you
think that would be entertaining.
You would I got the audiobook the second time around, which was the much better choice because it's read by Razor Fist, which made it a much better experience.
I can see that. I might actually pick up Death Mask if he narrated it.
It does have some supremely funny moments in it, though. I still say somebody needs to take his thesaurus away. I'm so tired of the word purloined.
Oh, what was I reading? So, if you've been following the book club, which, by the way, link in the description of my Discord now, I've been reading a lot of the stuff from Appendix N. And some of the stuff, I swear, pinioned was like the most popular word of the 1940s. He pinioned his arms to the ground as they grappled.
I mean, I'm sure that that's eliminating for, common words. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure the most common popular word would be something like the.
Speaking of overused phrases, getting back to Overlord, the phrase like a puppet with his strings cut. if you've read the books. It's like every
I couldn't get to the
breach-
second.
I've gotten through the first 10. So
I don't
mean,
know how you did that.
That's a good phrase to use once or twice. I can see how it would get very old and quickly.
it's about twice a book. And they're not
Oh.
long books.
You know, I don't even blame that because the amount of times I've described somebody getting shot and falling, there are only so many interesting ways to say that somebody collapses.
True.
I kind of err on sometimes just keep it simple and then it's not going to stand out. Just say he collapsed.
That works a little better than like a puppet with the strings cut, because when you see it at like when you're in the 10th book and it's the 16th time you've seen it, you're just kind of like, come on. Like, I know Japanese is a little bit limited in its turns of phrase, but
You can say he fell like a puppet with his strings cut, you know, like at a pivotal moment once or twice, and then the rest of the time just he collapsed, toppled, fell.
it's like, well, maybe
So
that
because
guy
I
fell like
play
stack
a lot of
potatoes.
video games, I keep wanting to say dropped like a ragdoll.
Yeah, that
Because
would have
when
been.
a character dies, they ragdoll.
See, now if he had done that, but like changed it to where it all kind of related to a puppet or a doll or something, that might have been an interesting little mechanism to put in there, but it's all the same thing. Like, it wouldn't have been good, but it would have been interesting.
Okay, so you've read 10 volumes of Overlord.
Yes.
Do you think... I can't read the author's name from here. Do you think that author like understands how the world works?
So from like the actual world, probably not. From what I understand, it's Overlord is written by a guy who lost his D&D group and he couldn't get them to come around anymore, so he just wrote the adventures he wanted them to have. Like, that's the whole reason he wrote the series. Now, I'm not sure that's true. That's just what I've read. But
I mean, that's what he attests to in the author note, at least of
Okay.
the first volume.
Okay. So there are things I really like about Overlord. There are things I kind of don't like about Overlord. How can I phrase this? I like the overarching theme that that Ainz is really just this stupid, powerful being who's lonely. Like, he can't connect to the beings underneath him because he made them. Like, he was part of the group that made them. He can't connect to the people in this outside world because they don't share what's with him. It's like the lonely god looking for all those who left him. But then there's
that keeps getting undercut by the Lich no mental effects effect.
Yeah, but I mean, it does. I do kind of like the fact that his new body is kind of forcing him to think a different way. If they'd played that up a little bit better, like to where he's brought by degrees to understand why he's like this, it's like, okay, well, this makes more sense to me because I am a Lich now. That would have been better. Like, if it was degrees, not like all of a sudden. But I think the story really does pick up about where about where the last season left off, where he's taken over that kingdom and he killed that prince. Those were good moments.
Not in the anime.
What, you don't think they were good moments?
No.
Well,
He was so stupid. I hated it.
I'm just gonna let you two do
I
that.
despise overpowered MCs who don't understand that they're overpowered. And it's not like there are a few gag series where the hero from the last village before the demon lord comes back to the beginning or whatever. And you can self-aware make fun of that. But when the series coming back to Remonster doesn't know how to handle an overpowered MC, it becomes very apparent.
True. I still would say Overlord is better than Remonster, though.
Probably. Remonster got really bad really fast.
Well, Remonster shared a lot of the problems with some other books that I've read that I'm not going to mention, where it's really just the main character is just telling you how he became more powerful and how he just dominates everybody and gets all the women. That's really all Remonster is. And I've only watched the anime. I haven't read the manga or light novels, God forbid, if those exist.
So here's my theory. There are two very close seeming genres of story. One is the progression of getting stronger, and the other is the guy who is stronger.
Mhm.
And they seem to naturally lead in one into the other. But I'm convinced that it is actually a completely different skill set for the writer. And very often, the writer who does a good progression does not know how to write a guy who just is strong.
That would be a valid point because you are approaching from two different areas. It would be a very versatile writer who could pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times this is why when the MC becomes very strong, that's kind of, at a certain point, that's when the series ends, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times, if there's an attempt to pick that up later, unless they have a new character replace them, there's a lot of struggle. A lot of times
So,
they
have
just
either of you
rely on
watched Eminence in the Shadow?
legacy character.
I have not.
What was the show? Yes.
Eminence in the Shadow?
No, not familiar with that.
That's one you may have seen the clip of. I am atomic.
No, I
And
haven't seen that.
from the beginning, he's the most powerful person in the world, and he knows it, and he's just role playing, trying to be cool, basically, and is all like mysterious, but he's also kind of stupid. It's spectacular. And it is actually going backwards, it feels like, into the progression because it's actually explaining the isekai now, and I cannot wait for the next season. I thought it was just like, haha, funny, overpowered MC with a harem of girls. And then it's actually improving on that somehow.
Okay.
So I'm a little. I just finished up the Mushoku Tensei recent series, or recent season, and like I'm really far ahead in the light novels. I like the story, but I'm just a little bit tired of harem stuff right now.
So Mushoku Tensei, actually, I'm one of the guys that has a problem with the fact of his proclivities and interests.
You are not alone.
I think it's a very common complaint with the series. However, it's extremely apparent that the guy understands how to make a world. It is a very realized fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best I can think of.
See, I would say that Rudy, the main character, like his proclivities and some of his problems are one of the things. It makes a nice kind of post to judge the rest of the season, or rest of the show by, or the rest of the books by, because he is still kind of a fish out of water, and he's not just some wood post that's going through the story. He himself is his own character,
Right?
Demented and perverted as he is, but it's
the whole dynamic with his sister in the last season, I thought was very well handled.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still waiting for the proper explanation of what he was supposed to regret.
Oh, that's that is next season. It's
no spoilers. Just answer yes or no. Should he have boned the Beast Girls?
I'm going to say Rudy made the right choice.
Okay, interesting. I can't wait for next season.
Oh, next season. You get it. Let's just say Mushoku Tensei has the best concept for a villain that I've seen in a long time. I really, really, really like the villain in the series.
Cool. Normally, villains are so cookie cutter.
I can't say anymore without spoilers because that's just the nature of the show. Like I'm actually almost done with the light novels. I haven't picked up since I did my review on them almost 2 years ago. Or a year ago, I think. Was it a year? Might be 2. So I will say some of the worst parts of the show are the slice of life parts, though, or not the show, the books. Like you'll have whole books that are dedicated to nothing but Rudy's home life and what goes on in the lives of some of the lesser characters.
Okay. I'm going to trust the fact that studio was put together specifically to animate Mushoku Tensei, and they poached to the best talent they could. I'm just going to have faith.
So somebody informed me, and I'm not sure how true this is because I haven't got to look it up yet, that the whole reason Mushoku Tensei is a show is because some crypto bro really liked the light novels and footed the whole bill to make the show. Like he liked it so much, he's like, no, I want the show to be exactly this.
Crypto bros, can I interest you in my books?
But It's like, well, I like the fact that that's one of the reasons the show is so close to the book. Like, I was surprised we got the polygamy we got in the second season. Like, I'm like, there's no way they're going to do this.
So, as I understand it, a lot of people refer to Mushoku Tensei as like the granddaddy of isekai.
I could see that.
Which is a interesting thing to see how specific stories can clearly take from a previous genre, but of their own quality, cause such a shit show of derivatives. Here in America, the more classic example is probably Hunger Games, caused 5 years of dystopia YA
with a very specific type of dystopian YA. Because when you think about it, dystopian YA could be like a very broad category. You could do a lot of different things with that, but it was always, adolescent girl in some kind of dystopian organized society that's usually some kind of exaggerated social commentary on something. And then, she would have a couple of love interests. And she'd end up leading some kind of resistance, right?
Okay. Question for the both of you. And this is, what do you think has done more damage to literature? The Hunger Games or Twilight?
Oh, gosh.
Harry Potter.
Yes.
Harry Potter's not part of this question.
Twilight.
I don't think Twilight really did anything.
Yeah, Hunger Games.
It spawned Light Lark. Read Light Lark and tell me that it didn't
No,
do
you
anything.
can't blame one book for the equivalence of what Hunger Games did.
I can blame whatever I want because I had to read both those god awful books.
Well,
those were some
and
of the
you
worst
can watch
books.
his reviews on his channel, linked in the description.
Yes, you can.
Hunger Games is better. Certainly, it has like things to like about it that it does well, and it still are kind of on point. So Twilight is, of course, the worst book, but like,
it's not that bad. It's just not written for anyone but a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's like trashy romance, but made more age appropriate for a younger audience. And like it's like this thing that it's like, how seriously should we take this? Can you take this? It's catering to its niche.
So I have the unique privilege of having read neither of those genres, just all the derivatives that came out after them.
So Hunger Games is actually fine because it was actually making correct satire, like poignant satire. That was basically lost on the people the book was sold to, because it was being sold to teenagers who didn't understand the political theater of Washington, D.C. at that time.
What time period was this that Hunger Games was released?
Hunger Games came out in like 2006, I want to say. It was about the Iraq War.
Yeah, it's making fun of Washington, D.C. culture, and also a big thing is it's making fun of the entertainment industry, particularly like reality TV, which was, a big thing back then, and like sports shows
2008
and all this stuff. I mean, we still have though elements of that. Like we still have, now it's just moved to, like our YouTube and Twitch, and like we still have, people monetizing their lives and stuff. And so it's still fairly on point. There's still a lot of points it makes as far as the satire that's kind of still land.
I should include in my cyberpunk prank influencers.
Oh, please make them.
What an easy antagonist.
Give them a terrible fate. Actually, that would be the best supreme antagonist. The whole thing was just so he could prank the entire city. It's like, you'll suffer for my views.
No, that would be a competent prankster. I'm talking about Johnny Somali or whoever. Like these people invading Japan just to break the law and live stream it. Or that guy who was just barging into random people's houses and live streaming it.
That is the perfect asshole victim. You need a person to die to demonstrate, the monster, villain, whatever you have. You just know what you have that needs to happen. Then you throw in a prank tuber, and you've got your little segment where you introduce that.
Sometimes
so
I
book
think
4 in my Bastion Black Zone series is supposed to be a closed room murder where the idea is that like 4 or 5 video game streamers pulled a Halo 2 and they refused to disconnect from their favorite game servers when the company tried to pull the plug. And as long as they don't disconnect, the servers can't shut off. And the cop gets pulled in because one of them died under mysterious circumstances, and boom, closed room murder. But they're all streamers. I can definitely add this in.
There you go. So it seems I would suspect that the plot's going to reveal. I might be wrong about this, but because you gave me a very basic summary, but I'd suspect just off that basic summary that the people who want to close the server are trying to bump them off. Or maybe kill one, frame the others.
I would say it was one of the streamers trying to kill the others for clout.
I mean, that you could
I'm
also
going to have a lot of red herrings, okay?
They're saying you're stealing our ideas.
I make no secret of the fact that I am here to steal knowledge from your brains to make my books better.
I'm not writing a story about guys in VR murders right now. So
yeah, so why do you care? Give me your ideas.
Giving you inspiration because I'm writing something completely different. So
I'm just here to talk about storytelling. Like in all of its forms. I don't care if you steal some of my ideas.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, to try and bullet point a lot of this, it is a chronic problem, even among successful series, where the only reasonable conclusion is that the writer is informed by fiction and not by reality. And there's really no other explanation for how some of these things happen. Simply, they don't understand how the world works.
Oh, yeah.
I could agree with that. I would probably add that most of these people have probably led sheltered lives that don't really tailor themselves to writing well. Like to actually have something interesting to say, you do have to suffer somewhat in your life. Like you don't understand suffering until you've suffered. And I think a lot of these people haven't put in the necessary suffering. Like they haven't starved. They haven't had to make their own way. They haven't had to grow their own food. That's not necessary for everything, but you should suffer in some way.
I wouldn't say,
I understand that.
I wouldn't frame it as suffering. You need to get out and live a little. I mean, you look at older authors, Ian Fleming wrote James Bond. What was he doing before that? He was
I have no idea.
Actually an agent in the war. He did all this stuff. He traveled all around the world. He did all this crazy stuff. What else? J.R.R. Tolkien.
He wrote it all from a mansion in Bermuda or something.
I'm not saying rich people can't suffer. I'm just saying that you need to live some. You need to have your survivability questioned.
You need to have life experiences, a depth of life experiences, which, I mean, there are a lot of authors now who have not done much of that. And people just kind of live on the screen and whatever.
All right, so we're at the hour mark. I did say I wanted to wrap up around the hour mark. We meandered, we tangented, had a good time. Do you guys want to plug your stuff before we wrap up?
Sure. My name's T. Alex Ratcliffe. You can head over to my YouTube channel to watch my reviews and talks on storytelling. I also have my next book coming out, Battle Games Book 2, on this Saturday. So if you want to see how I've progressed over the last 4 years in writing a story, you're more than welcome to try that, or my other book, Hapless Homesteader.
Okay. I'm Ian Knoll, but my YouTube channel is Thrifty Gaming. That's what I'm using as the name here. So you can find that. You can see I've done a book and graphic novel review somewhat recently. Before that, I did video game stuff and a bunch of just analysis and commentary on stuff. But some of that's older. And then my book, is actually an anthology book that is not written by just me, although I was the one who was the main one who put it together. It's called Phantom Whispers, Volume 1, sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and everything in between. It's kind of a bit of a pulpy thing. But we have a collection of short stories in there, 11 of them, and it's been pretty well received so far. So, you can get that on Amazon.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on, guys.
Not a problem. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, have a great one.